Hey, what's going on, everybody, and welcome back once again. My name is Jordan, also known as JMonster, and today I want to talk to you about a very controversial subject. No, it's not Star Wars. No, it's not politics. It has nothing to do with the impeachment in the United States. This is about morale. That nebulous, most nebulous of stats that seems to perform differently depending on context, even with the same unit. So sometimes you've got a unit that's got like 25 morale, and miraculously it runs away because it's just a little bit surrounded. It's, potentially going to win combat, but it ends up running away. And it can be very confusing for a lot of people, and the stat itself is affected by so many things that it's not always clear immediately why things run away when they do. I can tell you right now that there are probably over a dozen things that affect morale. It is one of the most variable stats in the game. So let's start with the basics. The morale score. That's going to be noted in the unit card here that you can see, and every single one of these units is going to have that. It's going to give you a lot of essential information, whether or not that unit has an Inspire effect, its speed, its base morale score, armor, shield, skill, etc., etc. That's the starting point. So 20 morale on this unit is extremely high. To put that into perspective, units in vanilla seem to range from about 4 to 12 morale. 12 being like the absolute top end. And so our basic militia tier units in Similarly in Total War have 12 morale. That does not mean that these units cannot flee. Just because they have a much higher value than vanilla, units in vanilla Total War or vanilla Medieval 2 Total War run very, very easily. And there's a bunch of reasons for that. So one of the most prominent things that affects morale, and I think a lot of people know about this as well, is a unit's level of fatigue. Now, how quickly a unit experiences fatigue is controlled by a trait in the EDU, which is the stat file. There are three possibilities. There is the absence of a trait, so a null value. And then there is the hardy trait, which is like the middle of the road. Most units are going to have hardy. In Similarly in Total War, all elven units have very hardy, which is the highest one. Whereas all orcs and human units have the hardy trait. And a lot of special units, like 2 HP elites, are very hardy, so they match the elves in fatigue. That's just kind of how the breakdown works in our mod. But that is going to affect how quickly your units deplete their fatigue, and therefore how quickly they take morale penalties associated with being tired. And there's various tiers, and I don't know the exact numbers. In fact, I don't think anyone really does. But it is obvious and clear that a unit's level of fatigue will affect its morale. So exhausted units take penalties in melee defense, and they take penalties in morale, and they probably take some penalties in other things. Certainly in speed. Just general effectiveness. And so the lower they are in their fatigue, the more closer they are to exhausted, the higher the morale penalty is going to be, and therefore more likely they are to rout. So for low tier units, that's really significant. Even units like the Stalkers of Thargelion, which by vanilla standards have very high morale scores, super easy to get them to rout when they are lower on morale. The next thing is whether or not that unit is losing combat. Even if they're not taking casualties really, really quickly, if they're losing combat, they will take a penalty to morale. Third, is that if that unit is outnumbered or not is also going to determine how likely they are to rout. So if you have a tiny unit of 53 Otorn Mightimo and they are fighting against 400 or 500 orcs, even with a massive score of 20 morale, it's entirely possible that they will run away. Or at the very least, they will drop to Shaken, and then they'll be susceptible to maybe getting attacked from behind or something. But we'll get into positional effects a little bit later on. Next is whether or not that unit is taking casualties at a rapid enough rate to trigger a mechanic known as a morale shock. So there are 3 traits that govern a morale shock. And a morale shock is when a unit takes at least 20% casualties in very rapid succession of their overall unit score. So that's going to vary depending on the size of the unit. But if a unit of, let's say, 200 takes, 20% casualties, I don't know what that is off the top of my head, my math is terrible, please don't judge me. If they take 20% casualties, then they will suffer what's known as a morale shock, which will drop their morale score quite precipitously. And that's going to vary from unit size to unit size, and that's going to be controlled How they respond to that, whether or not they run away, whether or not they drop down, one level to Shaken, or they drop all the way down to Wavering, is going to be controlled by 3 stats. And that is their morale response in the EDU, which is the stat file. There's 3 possibilities. One is low. The next is normal, which is obviously the middle of the road stat. And then there is discipline, which is the best stat that you can have. So low is the worst, normal is the middle of the road, and then discipline is the highest. And similarly in Total War, all dedicated infantry that is not skirmish infantry, or archers, etc., have the discipline trait. In fact, all horsemen have that as well. And all line infantry have the discipline trait. So they respond well to morale shocks. It's harder to rout dedicated line infantry than it is skirmish infantry that's just been thrown into the fray as a desperation move. Next, we have the fear trait. So whether or not there is the presence of a fear trait nearby to a unit. I don't know what the radius on fear is. Nobody knows. It's not really outlined. Maybe somebody out there knows. I don't know. If you're out there and you know the answer to that, please correct me, because I would love to know that. As somebody who has to balance the mod, that's like essential information for me. But whether or not a unit causes fear will cause units nearby to take a morale penalty. That's fairly straightforward. Next, we have Inspire, and this can come in a couple different forms. So Inspiration can come from custom traits, which we have for similarly in Total War, and you can see that outlined here in the Otorn Maitimo description. And that's the passive ability, +3 morale in 50 meters. I don't know what that translates to in like practical size on the battlefield map. Like, what's 50 meters? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could figure it out by like using the range of arrow units and then guesstimating. I don't know. That's not important. But these will give a certain amount of morale in a certain radius around that unit. And that's going to radiate from, I believe it's any unit in the, or any individual in the unit. So I don't think it's from the center. I think it's just outward from wherever that unit is. So if you spread your units out a little bit, then you can give them that Inspire effect. The next way to get Inspire is from a general being present nearby. Whether or not your general is there is going to determine how willing your soldiers are to continue the fight. That's pretty obvious. When the commander's nearby, they're less likely to run away under his supervision. Next, we're going to get into some of the more positional things, and I think I'd like to show you that on the battle map. So let's jump into just a quick custom battle, and I can demonstrate the concepts that I'm talking about. So here we are on the battle map. Now, if you notice, my units here are arranged in a line. And one important feature of morale is that your units that have their flanks protected actually get a morale bonus because they feel much more safe. And Napoleon Total War does a really good job of communicating this with their little tooltip here that you can see, but not so much Medieval 2. So units nearby help your units feel more secure. That's fairly obvious. Where a unit gets attacked from is also going to have an effect on morale. So if we take a look at like the flank here, if you get attacked in the flank with a unit, like say this cavalry from Doriath, instead of charging headlong into our spears like the stupid AI is inevitably going to do, they attacked us from the flank, you would take a morale penalty. If we are attacked from the rear, we take a larger morale penalty. That's just kind of obvious. But if you're attacked from the front, then obviously that's not as much of a problem. And now this is fairly straightforward, but it also does kind of translate into some weird kind of less obvious mechanics. So mass pushing. If I were to pop these guys all into shield wall, it's going to increase their mass. Everybody probably knows that at this point. And then I can use these units to push through the enemy. If you are pushing through the enemy, your units are going to feel like they're being attacked from the flank or the rear, or even worse, feeling like they're surrounded. Surrounded units take big penalties to their morale. So units that are pushing through, not only are they going to take that penalty from feeling like they're surrounded or attacked in the flank or attacked in the rear, there's also going to be whether or not they're outnumbered at play. They'll probably take a lot of casualties doing this, so they're going to also take a penalty from that. So if you plan on doing mass pushes, then you need to have something like your general nearby. You need to have units nearby so that that unit feels safe. Sending a single unit to die in a horde of enemies is going to result in that unit running away very quickly. It doesn't really matter how elite they are. Even if they've got 18 morale, which in comparison to vanilla is a massive score, and even in similarly in Total War is very, very high, that unit will still run away if they are outnumbered, losing combat, being flanked, etc., etc. All of these things are contributing factors to whether or not a unit is willing to stand and fight. Being separated from other units, being separated from their general, all of this has to be considered when judging how well your unit is going to fare in close combat, whether or not they're going to run away. And as someone who I presume wants to at least try and win their multiplayer games, or at least put up a decent fight, you need to bear that in consideration as a commander. So, morale. It's super confusing. There's a million and one things that affect it. I hope that this helps kind of demystify it a little bit. I know these aren't like the most like elaborate kind of examples, and we're not really able, or I wasn't really able to show you any sort of practical demonstrations. But I think a lot of this stuff is fairly straightforward, and it will help demystify the stat a little bit, because I see a lot of people wondering, and I've had conversations with testers or people who are interested in the mod, and I see it in YouTube comments all the time. People are like, oh my god, these units shouldn't run away, yada yada yada. That is controlled by mechanics, and those mechanics are sometimes a little bit opaque. But morale is one of the stats that's affected by so many different things. And I think I've outlined all of the ones that I could think of, and I hope that this helps shed a little bit of light on it. So when you see a unit run away, it's not immediately, oh my god, you need to buff their morale, because just increasing numbers doesn't really change anything if there's a whole bunch of other factors that are at play. So I hope this helps you in your battles. Hope this helps you have a better experience when playing Medieval 2 Total War, because I know it can be a little bit frustrating, especially when your units run away and you don't understand why that is. So yeah, my name is Jordan, also known as JMonster. Hope you guys are enjoying the Silmarillion Total War Alpha, and I'll see you next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye!